The Iron Maiden stands in the museum behind velvet ropes and warning signs, its rusted spikes dulled by centuries but still capable of inspiring dread in anyone who looks too closely at the interior cavity shaped precisely to the contours of a human body. Tourists take photographs. Children ask questions their parents struggle to answer. But what the museum placard doesn't tell you is that the Iron Maiden, despite its fame, was likely never used by the Inquisition at all. It's a 19th century fabrication, a Gothic horror story made metal. The real devices were far more insidious, far more carefully designed, far more psychologically devastating than any spiked coffin could ever be. They didn't just break bodies, they broke wills, shattered identities, transformed human beings into hollow shells who would confess to anything, betray anyone, renounce their deepest beliefs just to make the pain stop for one blessed moment. The engineers of the Inquisition understood something that modern interrogators have spent centuries rediscovering: that the most effective torture doesn't destroy the body quickly but slowly, methodically, with precision that leaves the victim conscious and coherent enough to speak the words their tormentors want to hear. If you've ever wondered how systems of organized cruelty function, how ordinary people participate in extraordinary evil, then this journey into the mechanics of suffering will reveal truths that are as relevant today as they were 500 years ago. And if you want more explorations of history's darkest corners, hit that subscribe button. Because we're not afraid to look directly at what humanity is capable of when it convinces itself that cruelty serves a higher purpose.
The descent into the torture chamber begins with stairs, always stairs, leading down into the earth, each step taking you further from daylight and divine mercy both. The architects of the Inquisition understood that torture begins not with the first turn of the screw, but with the journey to the place where screaming accomplishes nothing, where no one will hear you except those who want you to scream. These chambers were typically housed in the basements of Inquisition buildings, in converted cellars of confiscated properties, in spaces deliberately chosen for their acoustic properties and their psychological weight. Underground means buried, underground means forgotten, underground means that whatever happens here exists outside the normal rules of human society, in a space where different laws apply, where the usual prohibitions against inflicting suffering are suspended in service of higher truth. The walls are stone, always stone, because stone doesn't absorb blood the way wood does, doesn't rot or warp or retain the smell of human waste and fear. Stone can be washed clean between sessions, scrubbed down by servants who learned not to ask questions about the stains they were removing. The floors are often sloped slightly toward drains, practical engineering for spaces where bodies leak fluids in quantities that would pool and fester without proper drainage. The ceilings are vaulted, high enough to accommodate the full extension of ropes and chains, low enough to create a sense of compression, of the weight of the earth pressing down. There are no windows in most torture chambers, or if there are windows, they're narrow slits near the ceiling that let in only thin bands of light, never enough to illuminate the space fully, never enough to provide any sense of connection to the world above. The temperature in these underground spaces remains constant throughout the year. Cold in summer, colder still in winter, a bone-deep chill that seeps into flesh and makes muscles contract involuntarily. This cold is not incidental but essential to the function of the space. Cold bodies feel pain more acutely. Cold muscles cramp more easily. Cold air preserves the clarity of consciousness, prevents the merciful fog of fever or heat exhaustion from dulling the victim's awareness of their suffering. The torturers work in their shirt sleeves despite the cold, warmed by exertion and perhaps by something else, while the accused shivers on stone floors or metal frames, their bodies losing heat steadily, their teeth chattering between screams. Some chambers feature braziers where irons are heated until they glow, and the contrast between the searing metal and the frigid air creates its own particular agony, the body unable to regulate or anticipate caught between extremes that scramble the nervous system's ability to process sensation. The devices themselves are arranged with deliberate care, positioned where the accused can see them upon entering, where each instrument becomes a promise and a threat simultaneously. The strappado hangs from a ceiling beam, a simple rope and pulley system that looks almost innocent until you understand what it does, to shoulders when a body is hoisted by wrists bound behind the back. The rack dominates one wall, its wooden frame polished smooth by decades of use, its rollers and gears maintained with the same attention a miller gives his grinding stones. The brodequins wait in corners, iron boots, designed to be filled with wedges that crush legs with mathematical precision. There are thumbscrews and head crushers, branks and heretics' forks, each device engineered to exploit specific anatomical vulnerabilities, each representing years of accumulated knowledge about how human bodies break and where they break most effectively. These are not the products of sadistic imagination run wild, but of careful observation and refinement, tools designed by people who studied pain the way physicians study healing, who understood that suffering could be measured and controlled and made to serve specific purposes. And the room itself becomes a kind of theatre, where the devices are props, where the torturer is both director and performer, where the accused plays the only role available to them, the role of someone who will eventually, inevitably, say whatever words are required to make the performance end. The accused enters the torture chamber in chains, but the chains are almost superfluous because terror has already bound them more effectively than any iron. They have been brought here not suddenly, but through a process of deliberate psychological preparation that began days or weeks earlier in their cell, where they had nothing to do but imagine what awaited them, where guards would whisper about others who had screamed for hours, where the architecture of dread was constructed brick by brick in their own mind. Now they stand in the actual space, and reality somehow manages to be worse than imagination, because imagination lacks the specific details, the smell of old blood that soap cannot entirely eliminate, the grooves worn into stone floors by decades of dragged feet, the way their own breathing echoes off vaulted ceilings. The Inquisitor is present, robed and formal, flanked by scribes who arrange their parchment and ink with bureaucratic precision. This is not chaos, this is procedure. The Inquisitor begins by offering mercy, which is itself a form of cruelty. He explains in calm, measured tones that confession can end all of this before it truly begins, that the Church desires not the destruction of the body but the salvation of the soul, that truthful admission of heresy will result in penance rather than prolonged suffering. The accused is invited to speak, to unburden themselves, to cooperate with the holy work of rooting out corruption from the body of Christ. Some break here, confessing to crimes they may or may not have committed, babbling anything that might prevent what comes next. But many hold firm, whether from genuine innocence or stubborn faith or simple inability to comprehend, that the institution claiming to represent divine mercy is about to systematically destroy them. For those who remain silent or who deny the charges, the Inquisitor nods to the torturer, and the second phase begins, the showing of the instruments. The torturer approaches each device with the careful attention of a craftsman displaying his tools, explaining in clinical detail what each one does to flesh and bone. He demonstrates the strappado by pulling the rope, showing how the pulley system works, describing how shoulders dislocate when the body drops suddenly after being hoisted. He turns the wheel of the rack slowly, making the wooden frame creak, explaining how the rollers stretch bodies until tendons snap and joints separate with sounds like breaking pottery. He holds up the thumbscrews, shows how they tighten, mentions almost casually that the pain is said to be beyond description, that strong men weep like children within seconds. This catalogue of horrors is not sadism but strategy, allowing fear to do work that pain has not yet been required to accomplish. The accused watches and listens, and their imagination fills in details more vivid than any demonstration could provide. Some confess now, their resistance crumbling under the weight of anticipated agony, but others still refuse, and for them the ritual progresses to its inevitable conclusion. The first application of torture is carefully calibrated, authorized by specific ecclesiastical procedure that requires documentation and official approval. The accused is positioned on or in the chosen device, strapped to the rack, suspended from the strappado, feet locked into the brodequins, and the torturer begins his work with measured precision. He does not rush. He adjusts and tests, ensuring everything functions correctly, that the accused is secured properly, that maximum effect will be achieved with minimum wasted effort. A physician stands nearby, watching not with compassion but with professional interest, monitoring pulse and breathing, ready to intervene only if death becomes imminent. The scribes wait with quills poised, ready to record every word. Then the pain begins, not all at once, but gradually, building from discomfort to agony in increments that allow the victim to experience each new threshold of suffering distinctly. The torturer watches faces more than devices, reading bodies like instruments, knowing when to pause, when to intensify, when to offer water and a moment's respite that makes the resumption of torture even more devastating. He asks questions between applications of pain, simple questions requiring simple answers, giving the accused opportunities to speak, to confess, to end this. Some do, others scream words that are not confessions, prayers or curses, or simple animal sounds of suffering, and for them the session continues until the authorized limit is reached, or their body fails, or they finally produce the words their torturers require. And then they are returned to their cells to contemplate whether they can endure another session, because the procedure allows for repetition, for escalation, for as many applications of torture as necessary to extract truth, or what the Inquisition has decided to call truth. Pain is simple. The body registers damage and sends signals to the brain, demanding attention, demanding action, demanding that whatever is causing the harm be stopped immediately. But the genius of inquisitorial torture lay in its understanding that pain alone is not enough to break a determined mind, that the body can endure extraordinary suffering if the will remains intact, if the victim can find meaning in their resistance, if they can tell themselves that their agony serves some purpose larger than mere survival. The devices were designed not just to hurt, but to render the victim completely helpless, to place them in positions where every instinct to fight or flee is frustrated by absolute physical constraint. Stretched on the rack, you cannot move. Suspended from the strappado, you cannot even shift your weight. Locked in the brodequins, you cannot pull away from the wedges being driven between iron and flesh. This enforced helplessness is itself a form of torture that operates on a different level than physical pain, attacking the fundamental human need for agency, for some measure of control over one's own body and fate. The isolation begins long before the torture chamber. The accused is separated from family, from community, from everyone who might reinforce their sense of identity and purpose. They are kept in cells where time becomes meaningless, where days blur into nights without distinction, where the only human contact comes from guards who regard them with contempt or pity, but never warmth. They are fed irregularly, kept uncertain about when the next meal might come, their bodies never allowed to settle into any rhythm or routine. Sleep is disrupted by sudden noises, by lights thrust into cells at odd hours, by the deliberate cultivation of exhaustion that makes clear thinking nearly impossible. The Inquisitors understand that a person cut off from all external support, deprived of sleep and regularity, kept in a state of constant low-level stress, becomes far more susceptible to suggestion, far more willing to accept the reality their captors construct for them. By the time they reach the torture chamber, they have already been softened, their psychological defenses weakened by weeks of calculated deprivation. The interrogations themselves employ techniques that would be recognized by modern psychologists as sophisticated manipulation. The accused is told that others have already confessed and implicated them, that resistance is pointless because the Inquisition already knows everything, that the only question remaining is whether they will cooperate voluntarily or require persuasion. They are presented with partial truths mixed with lies, creating confusion about what their interrogators actually know versus what they are merely claiming to know. They are offered deals, confess to lesser heresies and avoid the more serious charges, cooperate and receive mercy, resist and face the full weight of ecclesiastical justice. These offers are sometimes genuine, sometimes pure fabrication, but the accused has no way to distinguish truth from deception, no access to information beyond what their captors choose to provide. Some break under this psychological pressure alone, confessing to crimes they never committed simply to escape the uncertainty, to regain some sense of control by giving their interrogators what they want. The confession itself becomes a kind of relief, a resolution to unbearable tension, even when the confessor knows their words are lies. Those who survive the torture chamber often emerge more broken than those who died in it. Their bodies heal eventually, though some injuries, dislocated shoulders that never quite work properly again, crushed legs that leave permanent limps, nerve damage that causes pain for years, serve as constant reminders of what they endured. But the psychological damage runs deeper and lasts longer. They have been forced to betray themselves, to renounce beliefs they held sacred, to speak words that destroyed their own sense of identity and integrity. They have learned that their body can be turned against their will, that sufficient pain can make them do or say anything regardless of their convictions. This knowledge is corrosive, eating away at the foundation of selfhood, making it impossible to trust their own strength or judgment ever again. Some retreat into silence, their personalities flattened by trauma. Others become fervent supporters of the Inquisition, perhaps hoping to prove their conversion was genuine, perhaps simply unable to face the cognitive dissonance of having suffered for nothing. The Inquisition does not merely punish heresy, it transforms heretics into hollow vessels who have forgotten what it feels like to hold a belief strongly enough to suffer for it. And this transformation, this systematic destruction of individual will and conscience, is not a side effect of the torture, but its primary purpose, the reason these devices were crafted with such care and employed with such precision. The Inquisition sought not just confessions but conversions, not just compliance but the complete reconstruction of human consciousness according to approved patterns. The torture chambers were not dungeons of mindless violence, but laboratories where souls were disassembled and reassembled, where the raw material of human personality was melted down and recast in forms the institution found acceptable. And the terrible efficiency of this process, its ability to break even the strongest resistance, stands as testimony to how well the architects of the Inquisition understood the human mind and how fragile our sense of self becomes when subjected to sufficient, carefully calibrated cruelty. The Spanish Inquisition officially ended in 1834, though it had been declining in power and scope for decades before that final dissolution. The torture chambers were closed, the devices dismantled or sold to collectors, the buildings repurposed for less sinister functions. The men who had operated these systems of organized cruelty retired or died, taking with them the specific technical knowledge of how to operate a strappado for maximum effect, or how to calibrate a rack to dislocate without killing. But the principles they had refined over centuries did not disappear with the institution. Instead, they evolved, migrated, found new homes in secular bureaucracies that discovered they needed similar tools for similar purposes, extracting confessions, breaking resistance, transforming defiant individuals into compliant subjects. The vocabulary changed from theological to political, from heresy to treason, from saving souls to protecting the state, but the underlying logic remained remarkably consistent. Sufficient pain, properly applied, can make people say or believe almost anything. Colonial powers exported these techniques alongside Christianity, building torture chambers in distant lands where indigenous populations needed to be pacified, converted, made to confess their resistance to imperial authority. The devices themselves were sometimes simplified. Rope and water require less infrastructure than elaborate mechanical contraptions, but the methodology remained intact. Isolation, disorientation, the systematic application of pain, calibrated to break will without destroying the ability to speak. These became standard tools of colonial administration. In the 20th century, totalitarian regimes rediscovered what the Inquisition had known: that torture is most effective when bureaucratized, when it follows procedures and generates paperwork, when it can be justified as necessary for some greater good. The Gestapo, the NKVD, the various secret police forces that proliferated during the Cold War all employed techniques that would have been instantly recognizable to an inquisitorial torturer. The electric shock replaced heated irons, the waterboard replaced the strappado, but the principles of helplessness, dread, and incremental escalation remained unchanged. Modern interrogation manuals, even those developed by democratic nations claiming to oppose torture, reveal the enduring influence of inquisitorial methodology. They speak of creating dependency, of manipulating environments to maximize discomfort and disorientation, of using stress positions that stop just short of causing permanent physical damage while inflicting extraordinary pain. They employ the same preliminary showing of potential consequences, and the same offers of mercy in exchange for cooperation, the same careful documentation of everything said and done. The language has been sanitized. We speak of enhanced interrogation rather than torture, of stress positions rather than strappado, of sleep deprivation rather than deliberate cultivation of exhaustion. But the techniques remain essentially identical to those developed 5 centuries ago in Spanish ecclesiastical basements. The sites have changed from church dungeons to black sites, from ecclesiastical courts to military tribunals, but the rooms still have no windows, the walls are still easy to clean, and screams still echo off stone or concrete surfaces designed to amplify and contain sound simultaneously. What the Inquisition ultimately demonstrated, what every subsequent system of organized torture has confirmed, is that the devices themselves were never the crucial element. You can break human beings with nothing more sophisticated than rope, water, and time if you understand the principles involved, if you're willing to treat suffering as a problem of engineering rather than morality. The real innovation of the Inquisition was not mechanical, but conceptual. The idea that cruelty could be systematized, justified, transformed from individual sadism into institutional policy. The torturers were not monsters, but professionals, often decent family men who attended mass and paid their taxes and saw their work as necessary service to a higher cause. The inquisitors who authorized torture were not devils, but devout believers convinced that temporary physical suffering was preferable to eternal damnation, that breaking bodies served the purpose of saving souls. This ability to rationalize extraordinary cruelty, to embed it within bureaucratic structures that diffuse individual responsibility, to convince participants that they serve noble purposes, this is the true legacy that persists wherever torture is practiced today. The men who waterboard prisoners at undisclosed locations tell themselves they're protecting national security. The officials who authorize such practices convince themselves that extreme circumstances justify extreme measures. The societies that permit these systems to operate look away and tell themselves that whatever happens in those rooms must be necessary, that surely no one would inflict such suffering without compelling reason. We have learned nothing from the Inquisition except how to replicate its methods while using different justifications. The torture chambers may be cleaner now, the documentation more thoroughly classified, the public awareness more carefully managed, but screams still echo in spaces designed to muffle them, and bodies still break, according to principles refined centuries ago by men who believed they were doing God's work. The devices in museums are curiosities, relics of a supposedly barbaric past we congratulate ourselves for having transcended. But the knowledge they represent, the systematic understanding of how to unmake human beings through calculated application of suffering, this knowledge has never been lost, only refined, adapted, and deployed with ever greater efficiency by institutions that find new reasons to justify ancient cruelties. The Inquisition's torture chambers closed, but the school they established remains open, its lessons learned and relearned by every generation that discovers it needs confessions badly enough to destroy those who will not provide them willingly.